So, do any of you remember that survey that showed a new Plants vs Zombies game? The game honestly looked pretty fun to me, and it would have been a breath of fresh air for this franchise that's been on live support for ages now. Well, EA/PopCap almost instantly cancelled that idea. I guess because they're allergic to good decisions. So, I decided to make this game myself. Here's how I made Plants vs Zombies, the RPG/roguelike/dungeon crawler. Based on the screenshot, the game would have had a top-down perspective and would have been a mobile game. Mobile games are so lame, we are not doing that. Instead of Unreal Engine, like I used in my previous GameDev videos, I want something simpler that runs way better. So Unity it is. I've never even touched C#, but it seems relatively similar to most object-oriented programming languages, so I think I'll be fine. Alright, if you've seen any of my previous videos, you know how this one's gonna start. Suffering in Blender. This is always the most hellish part for me. I am basing the Peashooter's design off of the image from the survey because, like, look at this cute little guy. He turned out so well. Little did I know, I would experience a lot of problems with coloring it because I made a lot of mistakes while making this model. Like, look at this part, the hat has somehow been duplicated, I really don't know how. And the Peashooter as well has some double faces, which I don't know why I did that, I don't know how I did that. And I would have to spend 2-ish hours just to make it even usable at all. I started out by making the basic movement, which helped me to learn how Unity handles scripts, collisions, and physics. I also learned what prefabs are and how to use them. The next logical step is adding rotation to the character, because right now the character just moves side to side and it looks a little bit strange. I felt like making the player face the mouse position would suit this type of game really well. I thought I had completed it, so I moved on to a basic attack, but I quickly realized something. My little Peashooter guy cannot aim correctly. This was the first big programming hurdle of this project. I spent many frustrating hours just on this one issue. It took me so long. But after a lot of research, I found out how to fix it. It took only a few changes and a few extra lines, so it's a little frustrating that it took that long to figure it out, but you know, it works. It works beautifully now. Amazing. But then I ran into another problem. This is kind of how the entire project will go. I start working on a new feature, something goes wrong, I spend a while trying to fix it, and eventually it'll work. Whether it'll work really well or be like duct tape code, who knows, but it'll work. Though I suppose this is kind of just software development in general. I wanted to approach this project in a more structured way. I wrote down what I wanted to add and then tried dividing it into smaller parts. This way I could fully embrace object-oriented programming and its benefits. For those of you who don't know, object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm based on the concept of objects. Yeah, this is boring. Essentially, I had to plan and build everything from the ground up to avoid this project from becoming a held together with duct tape mess like my previous two projects were. So to make the project more modular, I split up the logic. This involved adding a character manager, attack manager, UI manager, and room manager, all to an empty game object in the scene. Can someone with actual experience tell me whether or not this is how you're supposed to handle that? Because I don't know. Then I added an abstract character class and an abstract enemy class. An abstract class is essentially like a blueprint. There will not be an actual instance of that class existing, but instead, let's take for example character. There will not be a single object that's just character. It's always going to be more specific than that. So for example, Peashooter uses the character abstract class as a blueprint to tell it what it should be like and what methods and variables it should have. Using abstract classes like this will allow me to not have to redundantly repeat code, and it will help in making the structure of the project more easy to follow. Finishing all of this admittedly tedious foundational work granted me the opportunity to finally start working on the actual features of this game. So I did some fixes to the primary attack that I mentioned earlier, I added the secondary attack, and of course a reload feature. Something that I quickly discovered was that it's really important to accurately keep track of the order of execution of the code when working with multiple scripts. For example, to allow future character selection, I made the character manager in a way where it would spawn the selected character as soon as the scene loaded. However, a lot of scripts have some initialized data that relies on a character existing already. So if those scripts were to start before the character manager spawned the character, then a lot of things would go wrong. Problems like this haunted me through the entirety of the development process, and the way I fixed it by adding all character spawn stuff to an awake method instead of a start method is not something I am particularly proud of. The most fun part about making this game was definitely working on the character movesets. I decided that every character should have a primary and secondary attack, one utility move, 2 special attacks, and an ultimate move. The Peashooter got a normal P-shot, charged P-shot, dash, multi-shot, a bouncing shot that gets faster and does more damage after every bounce, and of course a Gatling P ultimate. Keeping up with my previous strategy of building everything in a future-proof way, I had to account for a future leveling up system, so I couldn't code any move stats in a hard-coded way. Instead, I made a list for each move that listed all the stats. This allowed me to easily upgrade a move later in code by simply changing the value in the list. With the Peashooter completed, although not fully refined yet, I started working on the Sunflower. Yeah, I think this is my 3D modeling magnum opus so far. Like, this character is so cute, I would buy a plushie of her. I added her to the game, although testing her would require a way to switch characters, so the previous character manager came in handy. I added a main menu UI and a character selector that would save my choice, so I wouldn't have to keep starting in a main menu while testing. I also added a fun little HUD for the character abilities. The Sunflower has a little wand, so I thought our main attack should use that. Primary attack is a small magic attack, and the secondary attack is a magic beam attack. Wow, that beam cost me so much trouble. It has two parts, a physics ray that checks for collision and a line renderer that shows the actual beam. There was a point where both the physics ray and the line renderer would go through obstacles. Then there was a point where the physics ray would go through the obstacles and the line renderer wouldn't. Then there was a point where the line renderer would go through the obstacles and the physics ray wouldn't. And then there was finally a point where both of them didn't go through the obstacles. But then the aiming was off. Anyway, the Sunflower got the aforementioned attacks, a healing sun utility ability, a solar explosion, a solar beam which kind of uses the logic of the magic beam attack, and of course a solar nuke. A solar explosion ability really messed with me. I wanted it to knock all the surrounding enemies back, but here's where the problem started. To keep it relatively brief, Unity has 3 different components for moving a character: a rigid body, a character controller, and a nav mesh agent. Wow, that's hard to say. An enemy that uses pathfinding will need a nav mesh agent component. Then to handle proper physics and collisions without writing a lot of annoying custom code, you will need to also give it a rigid body. For a player, you can choose either a rigid body or a character controller based on your needs. An easy way to apply knockback to enemies would just be to apply force to the enemy rigid body, but by doing this you will interfere with the nav mesh agent pathfinding, and even basic attacks will cause the enemy to start moving and sliding. I had this one problem where if I hit the enemy with like a P and then instantly moved into the enemy, I could easily just push it and he would just keep sliding and sliding and sliding. I would go back and forth on the way I dealt with these issues, and I've switched the player from a rigid body to a character controller back to a rigid body at least 3 separate times, which meant I had to change player movement code a lot and had to keep switching it back and forth. But without going through all the various solutions I tried, which would make this video about 3 hours long, I'll just tell you the solution I ended up settling on. I made it so that the basic physics don't affect the enemy unless specifically requested. Every enemy has a knockback method that accepts an amount of force and the direction. The knockback method turns on physics for the enemy and turns off the nav mesh agent. It then applies the force in a given direction and waits 0.4 seconds before cancelling all remaining knockback force. It then turns the basic physics off again and the nav mesh agent back on. It's not perfect, but it works. Something that might be fun to mention is that to make the solar nuke accurately launch to the mouse position with a nice curve, I had to use an actual physics equation for projectile motion. It took a lot of adjustments and a bit of time, but to apply physics like this in a practical way was actually pretty fun. Now that I have 2 characters finished, I thought it would be nice to make the HUD change depending on what character is chosen, because right now I have the Peashooter HUD and the Sunflower, which kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. I wanted to have an actual enemy 3D model instead of just shooting a capsule to test my attacks, so here you go, have this zombie, the name of which has been decided in my Twitter replies. Follow my Twitter, I posted a lot of progress videos and just interesting stuff in general. I worked on a zombie AI. In the gameplay screenshot, the zombie had a cone-shaped attack indicator, and I found that to be a really good idea, so I started working on that. I had to learn how to properly use shaders in Unity, and it was pretty difficult, but I made it work. During my tests, I had made a list of things that didn't work fully as intended, so I took a day to just fixing that and improving already existing features. I really wanted to avoid this game from doing something completely unexpected, like how the inactive mascot model in the horror game video just kinda ignores the position I put it in. I started working on a level up menu, so I had to seriously start consider balancing. The main considerations were as follows: how much damage should each move do? What should the cooldown be? Which stats should be upgradable? How much better should it get each level? And what would the maximum level be? To improve the level up system, I added an XP bar underneath the health bar and an ability point label in the level up menu. Okay, the lack of colors is seriously bumming me out, so I started texture painting, which also kind of bums me out. I hate texture painting, you should know this by now. Yeah, Peashooter model, it's a bit of a mess, but I got it to look decent, so I'll accept it for now. Look at the sunflower though, she's absolutely adorable. Oh, and I added some effects to the projectiles, that's pretty cool, I guess. Alright, we're in the home stretch now. By the way, I am just aiming for a first playable version in this video. There will be a part 2 video though. Bosses, more characters, better gameplay loop, maybe even multiplayer, so subscribe or the mage sunflower will get really sad. I felt like this version of the game should at least have a bit more enemy variety, and having only melee enemies would just be a bit too easy. So boom, bow and arrow zombie. I started working on 3D models for the map to help achieve the Plants vs Zombies aesthetic, the classic Plants vs Zombies aesthetic. I don't think I fully got it right, but it's better than just blank walls. I made a couple of room prefabs with a few enemy spawn points that get randomly selected. The room manager finally got a use by selecting a random room when spawning and picking a random next room and killing all the zombies and going through the door. Every third room, the level of the zombies increases and they will have more health and do more damage. Now that the main gameplay loop was done, I started to add something that I honestly should have added earlier on. Sounds. I thought it would have taken like an hour, maybe 2 hours at the maximum, but no, I was so terribly mistaken. I genuinely think that adding sounds took me about 8 straight hours. I scoured through audio rips from Plants vs Zombies 1 and the shooter games. Any sound I couldn't find somewhere online, I had to make myself. I'm sure you can easily tell which ones I made myself. By the way, I ended up choosing Banner for Neighborville sunflower sounds for my sunflower, because the Garden sounds without the in-game filter are, yeah. And then one of the last things I did was to change the main menu to make it not look as crappy as it did before. And then before letting Unity build the game, I went through the code and optimized it a bit by removing redundant parts, making some assignments more direct and just in general improving some of the logic. And now, the beta version is officially done. Go down below in the description and go play it. Please give me feedback or suggestions that I can use for my upcoming second video about this game, and I hope you have fun playing it. Also, yes, I know the sunflower's healing is way too OP considering the Peashooter can't heal at all. That'll be fixed next version. Stay tuned. Please.